Welcome back, everyone, to the Late Night Review. And this is a show where I talk about movies that I like, movies that I have nostalgia for. However, that doesn't mean I'll never talk about movies that I don't like. But usually, this show, like 90% of the time or more, this is about movies that I like, movies that I grew up watching, that I have nostalgia for, or movies that I just like a lot, movies that maybe they came out when I wasn't a kid, maybe they came out recently. I can talk about movies from any era, any time, including movies that I've seen now or recently, but mostly it's about movies that I like from the past, movies that I grew up with. And tonight is no exception. It's one of my favorite movies. And this was, when I was a kid, this was my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Part 3 was my favorite when that came out. And then this one, Part 4, was my favorite when it came out. Over the years, I've gone back and forth. The first one I've always loved. And nowadays, looking looking at all the films, part one is still my favorite. When I was a kid, I liked part one a lot. I mean, I really liked it. Part two came out. I actually like that. That's one of my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movies to this day. I was never one that hated it or didn't like it. I always liked it. Part three came out. That became my favorite. Part four came out, and then that became my favorite. Over the years, though, I've settled back down to part one. I love the neighborhood. Heather Langenkamp, that was her first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And the neighborhood, the mist, the music. I have nostalgia for that first one. I've shared this story on my Nightmare on Elm Street movie review, and maybe one or two other videos where I talked about the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I had a very nostalgic experience, something I have nostalgia for to this day. When I was a kid in 1984, I was 7, because I was born in 77. They took me to the theater. I went with my dad, my uncle, and my cousin to see a double feature in 1984. And it was at a theater called the Roxy. And it was probably, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night, maybe 7, 8, something like that. Anyway, the first feature, the first film was Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, directed by the great Wes Craven, starring Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, Heather Langenkamp, and Johnny Depp. That was his introducing Johnny Depp, it says, when you watch that film. Just have so much nostalgia. And the great John Saxon was in there. I remember him from Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. But anyway, I saw that. It became one of my favorites. My uncle walked out of the theater when his arms got long in the alley, and he stretched from almost one end to the other. And that was a fun experience, a very interesting experience. Um, probably not the best movie to take your kid to see, but I never will forget it. The first movie was Nightmare on Elm Street 1. It was a double feature. The Late Show was Evil Dead with the great Bruce Campbell, directed by Sam Raimi. I had such a fun time watching those two movies. They're still two of my favorites. Tonight I'm talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 4. When it came out, it became my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It was part 3. And then after a while, I went back to part 3. And then I went to part 4. Part 3 has Heather Langenkamp. And that's one of the main reasons I like it too. And it also was such a good story. I like the hospital setting and everything. But my favorite setting for a Nightmare on Elm Street movie is still a neighborhood, kind of a suburban American neighborhood. That neighborhood in part 1 is still my favorite. 1 and 2, because part 1 and 2 are very similar in that way with that neighborhood. One of the reasons I like part 2 is because, people might criticize it for being similar to the first one in the sense that they used the same neighborhood, same house. But that's one of the reasons I like it, because I love that setting so much. Part 4 became my favorite, and it's still one of my favorites to this day. Part 4, The Dream Master. Every time someone dies, Alice gets their power, and finally at the end she's all powered up and she has a confrontation with Freddy. at the end, which is good, enjoyable. It's one of my very favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I think nowadays, if I were to rank it, it would definitely be in the top 3 or 4. Sometimes it goes back and forth for number 3, but it's definitely in the top 4. Maybe one day on the channel I'll do a Nightmare on Elm Street ranking. They're some of my favorite movies, except for the remake. I thought it sucked. I didn't like it. Don't want to go into it tonight. I didn't like it. I thought it was cast pretty well. I thought everyone in there was talented. I'd seen some of their other work, and it was a good cast. But the way the movie went, oh, I can go on and on about that. But Nightmare on Elm Street for the Dream Master, I think the characters are interesting. I think Alice, her character, is very interesting. She has daydreams, and of course she dreams at night too. And I like how they played into, sometimes you didn't, they've done that with all the films where you don't know when a dream starts and you don't know what's reality, the difference between a dream and reality. And then they did that little loop scene because there's a few common things that people have in dreams. It's not so common with some people, but it can be common with others. One of them is you're trying to run. They utilize that in the first one. And then in the third one, you're trying to run, but your feet are stuck in something or you're going in slow motion. Another thing is where you keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And when she was going in circles, Alice was going, and Dan, they were going kind of in circles. That's kind of a common dream occurrence that they were playing on. I thought it worked pretty good. I like the part in the theater where she was in the theater and then she got sucked into the screen. I like the part where her brother was trying his martial arts against Freddy. I just wish they would have drawn that fight out a little bit longer. Freddy was invisible, and then her brother, by the way, who was doing the martial arts, I thought he looked like Ricky Nelson, actually. And he looked like he was in good shape. He dropped Freddy once, and I wish they would have had that last longer. I wish they would have drawn his character out a little bit more, and maybe a couple of the others too. But just like in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, the Dream Warriors, I wish they would have drawn out one or two of those characters a little bit more, and particularly the Wizard Master, when he had the kind of the green lightning come out of his hands and he hurt Freddy with it. I wish his character would have lasted longer. Maybe if he would have survived, like had a confrontation with Freddy and then barely survived, made it into the fourth one, and then Alice could have had those powers too, I think that would have been even better. That would have been awesome because he was the Wizard Master and he had those the special powers with the green lightning and everything. He can cast spells. I'm not sure, but I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought him fighting Freddy was one of the best parts of the movie with his powers. It should have been drawn out more. But that being as it may, and part 4 is directed by Rennie Harlin. If memory serves me right, he directed Die Hard 2, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Die Hard 2 is one of my favorite Die Hards, actually. I saw it at the theater, have a lot of nostalgia for it. Something about that snow, the airport and the snow, I saw it. My uncle took me to that. But in the Rennie Harlin, I think he directed Exorcist, the beginning, which was a fine movie. I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was a kind of a very good horror movie for a modern horror movie. A lot of times I don't like the way they do them nowadays. I think this might be counterintuitive, but kind of boring nowadays. I think sometimes they don't know, the timing is a little bit off and they don't know when to stop with the action or the blood, the gore, the kills, and then start. Sometimes I get bored with it, kind of the way modern horror movies are done. Even from the trailers, I could tell I'm not going to like it. Like from start to finish, it's not like a roller coaster. You go up and down. It's like you're on the same mode, and I get bored. But I thought it was one of the few modern horror movies that I actually liked. But you can't compare it to the first one or the third one. The third one has become my favorite out of that series. But yeah, Rennie Harlin, he has talent. I thought he did a really good job directing this film. I think it's a very good movie. I think it's scary. I don't really get scared by horror movies, but I can recognize a scary horror movie, and it has that Not as much as part one or two. I think those were more of the darker Freddy, a little more scary. And then that returns a little bit in the new Nightmare. But it was a combination, in this one, it was a combination of kind of a little bit of a dark Freddy in a way, but a lot of the pranking and the jokes, which I kind of found funny actually. I think Robert Englund, his personality and then his sense of humor, I like his sense of humor. I don't know myself. I know they went a little bit too far with it. I think the darker version of Freddy fits the story better, the genre, the Nightmare, the Freddy character better. But his sense of humor was, it made me laugh a few times. But I really think this is a good movie. It's not a slow pace. Most of them aren't anyway, but it's really, to me, it's fascinating. Something about a dream master. Like there's two gates, a positive gate and negative gate. I think Robert Shea played that teacher explaining that about dreams in the film, if I remember right. Bob Shea, Robert Shea, he was one of the, we owe him credit along with Wes Craven for starting this franchise to begin with. But The Dream Master is one of my very favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I really like the way it's done. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And I think one thing I have to say, though, they did kill our main characters off from the third movie. They did kill them off rather quickly. And I think it should have been drawn out more, where they went out with a lot more of a fight. And I think they should have put up a big fight before they were killed. But that being said, this is still one of my favorite movies. I don't like the way they got rid of the main characters from the third one so quickly. But I think that it was overall a really good movie. It's still one of my favorites. Robert Englund as Freddy. I mean, when you have him in the film, it just brings whatever Nightmare on Elm Street movie it is, whatever you might think about the movie itself, or whatever I might think about any particular Nightmare on Elm Street movie. When Robert Englund is in it playing Freddy, it just brings that movie way up to another level. And he's like Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Vincent Price, one of the greats of all time. And this is one of my very favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Most people have seen it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. You're in for a treat. Check it out. Please like and subscribe. Hit that thumbs up button. And this has been the Late Night Review. And good night, everybody. And watch out for Freddy. Don't have nightmares.